today I'm talking to New Statesman columnist David Gauke about whether Brexit is killing the Conservative Party. David, thanks for joining us. That kind of provocative title is the headline of a piece that you wrote for the New Statesman recently, just after the 3-year anniversary of Brexit Day, which was obviously the 31st of January, or Freedom Day. Do you remember it? Do you remember where you were? Did you see the fireworks? Did Big Ben bong?
Well, I did. I came in to do an interview on Sky News, actually. So on the evening itself, I was on with Kate Hoey, and there were lots of...
Was there champagne?
None that I was drinking. But no, there were lots of people. It was the first time I'd been back in Westminster since I'd left Parliament a few weeks earlier. And yes, walking through Parliament Square, and there were lots of people there sort of celebrating and with, flags and so on. And I heard one of them sort of say, "That's David Gauke," and I thought, this could be a little uncomfortable because I wasn't necessarily the flavour of the month with them. So yes, I remember going in and sort of being interviewed on the day, and it wasn't a day of champagne drinking, at least for me.
So that was January 2020. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, and the focus has very much been on the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine. But Brexit is back in the headlines at the moment, partly because of the IMF report saying that Britain is going to be the only major economy to shrink, and people looking at our economic situation, even having been through COVID, even having the sort of the pressures of the energy crisis as a result of Putin's war in Ukraine. And we are not faring well compared to countries that you would assume were our peers. Do you think there's finally an understanding that Brexit might have something to do with this?
Yeah, I think there has been an increased understanding of that. I think in the last 2 or 3 months, the climate has changed. You're absolutely right to say we've been in a really volatile period. There's been a heck of a lot of economic noise, if you like, that has, I think, obscured the economic consequences of Brexit. But now, as time goes on, just by looking at the UK's relative performance with other countries, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, COVID, these are international issues. Every economy has been hit by it. It's only really by looking at our relative performance and what is starting to emerge, the fact that the UK is the only major economy that is now not back at the level it was in 2019 is really quite striking. And prospects for the next few months are looking, again, very disappointing in both absolute and, most significantly here, relative terms. And what we are, I think, increasingly seeing, businesses are making this clear, the additional friction in our trade, the reduction to the size of our labour market, this is because of Brexit to a large extent, and that is having a real impact on our growth potential. We are evidently poorer than we would otherwise have been as a consequence of Brexit, and that's seeing that shift in opinion. And the public opinion polls now are very clear. The nation does regret the decision we took in 2016, and there's really quite a sizable number of people who would favour rejoining if the opportunity arose.
Yeah, you've got a figure here. In 629 of 632 British constituencies, those who regret Brexit outnumber those who don't. I mean, that is pretty striking, especially given that the 2019 Conservative election was won partly on Brexit as a cause and getting Brexit done. But do you think we have to draw a distinction between regretting it and wanting to rejoin? Those are different things. To say that this was not the best decision that Britain could have made and we would be richer as a country if we hadn't done that, that's different from saying now we're in the position that we are in 2023, let's go back.
Absolutely, I accept it. It's not the same. Regret is not the same as rejoin.
I hate these.
I know they're horrible. They're horrible, but you know what I mean. And they're not quite the same thing. Even so, somebody who is likely to be saying, I regret the vote, even if they're not necessarily in favour of rejoining, and many of them are, but even if you're not in that position, you might still be thinking, well, we need a more sensible, practical, pragmatic relationship with the EU In other words, we need to get closer to the European Union. And that is different from where we were before. It also means that the Conservative Party doesn't obviously have a big kind of electoral asset in terms of reopening the Brexit debate. And I think the assumption that many had after 2019 was that the next election, to keep that coalition of voters together, whoever's leading the Conservative Party would also be talking about
keep Brexit
done. Exactly, and that's a big asset to them. And look, Rishi Sunak has got a very difficult tactical decision to make as to whether to say, let's not talk about Brexit. This is actually now a negative issue for us, because even in all of those red wall seats, which, as you say, Rachel, are now sort of saying we rather regret the decision, it could lose them votes. So maybe we shouldn't touch it. If you take that view, then it's very hard to see how the Conservatives can win, because if they're sort of not touching the whole Brexit issue, then how do they win the red wall? How do they win these leave voting, generally northern or Midland constituencies that went Conservative largely because of the Brexit issue, that and Jeremy Corbyn, and of course he's no longer there. And it must be tempting, presumably, to think, well, we've just got to gamble that the Brexit issue is going to work for us. But so he's got that sort of tough strategic or tactical decision to make. But there's absolutely no guarantee that that's going to bring in the red wall in the way that it did in 2019.
Is there an age factor to this as well? Because the Brexit vote was 6.5 years ago, so that's sort of 6.5 years of a new cohort turning 18 and being able to vote. And we know that the Brexit vote skewed older, and especially because of COVID, many of those voters probably won't be around at the moment. Is that sort of a key factor as well, or do you think that the Conservatives' age problem is sort of a separate thing to Brexit and to what we've seen since?
No, I think it's a real problem. I mean, what we're seeing, I think, in the polling is very, very few people who voted Remain are sort of essentially changing their mind.
Apart from Liz Truss.
Apart from those with aspirations to lead the Conservative Party. What we are seeing is amongst those who voted Leave, actually the older voters are still sticking to their position. They've not moved. But the younger Leave voters seem to be the ones who are switching.
That's really interesting.
So that makes the demographic change even more striking. So as you say, the euphemism used is voter replacement, but yes, younger people coming onto the electoral register and older people dying, and disproportionately those older people will have voted Leave. And this is the real strategic dilemma, I think, for the Conservative Party, is that by the time we get to sort of 2028, 29, the general election after next, and then maybe move on to say 2032. You look at the people who were sort of over 65 in 2016, which is the bedrock of the Leave vote, are now going to be over 81. They will be fewer of them, and so given that people aren't sort of switching as they get older, they're not moving from being 50-year-olds who were sort of Remain, and then 10 years later, they're die-hard Brexiteers. All of this suggests, on the current trajectory, that support for a closer relationship with the EU, and as I say, potentially rejoin, is going to get stronger and stronger, and that the Conservative Party is very heavily on the wrong side of the argument. And I think it's I was there in the Cameron years, the modernisation, and what did that involve? Well, hugging huskies and hoodies, taking off your tie. These were relatively easy things to do. They didn't get to the core of what the Conservative Party was about. But the Conservative Party that essentially turned itself into a Brexit party, for that party to then essentially repudiate Brexit would seem to me an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. It's sort of stuck being a Brexit party as Brexit becomes more and more unpopular.
See, everything that you're saying, that's not being psychic, that's not having some kind of magical insight. It's sort of maths and looking at the trajectory and the polls. So there must be people within the Conservative Party sort of advising Rishi Sunak who can see these challenges and can see the danger with the Conservative Party staying as the party of a very hard Brexit, which isn't where the rest of the country is. Can you see a way for Sunak, who was a Brexiteer but quite a pragmatic one, and who has been making lots of sort of positive, warm noises about closer relations with the EU? I always say, if Brexit was a divorce, we're not going to get remarried, but a friends with benefits sort of relationship with the EU. But can you see a way for him to chart that successfully, or is it just too toxic after the last 6 years?
If he's going to do it, he needs to be able to take on the ERG, the European Research Group, and that is difficult because they're still pretty powerful, and they've got plenty of supporters in the press as well. And we look at the way that the Conservative Party members voted for Liz Truss last summer. So it's pretty brave if he does take them on. But I think the difficulty is, notwithstanding that tactical dilemma, how do you get those red wall voters at the next general election? The longer the Conservative Party tries to play Brexit as a central part of their identity, the harder it is going to be for the Conservative Party to remake itself for the electorate of the late 2020s and the 2030s, which will be much less enthusiastic about Brexit than the electorate of 2019. If you're Rishi Sunak, you can be forgiven for thinking, well, I've only got one shot at a general election and I need to do everything I can to sort of win that. But given it is quite a finely balanced judgment, do you play the Brexit card or do you not? Thinking about the long-term health of the Conservative Party, which might not be top of every New Statesman's listeners' concerns, but if you're looking at that sort of particular issue, the earlier you can start to put some distance between the Conservative Party and a hard Brexit, the better it is, I think, for the long-term health of the Conservative Party.
David Gauke, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can read David Gauke's article on how Brexit is killing the Conservative Party on the New Statesman website. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.